There was a time Williams used to be good. Trust me. That's why I feel like we'll have a great Formula One Grand Prix in Paul Ricard this year. Because France managed to get second at Eurovision. That is the reason why. At this point in my life, Ricard was only the alcohol my uncle was drinking during the aperitif. The aperitif. The circuit Paul Ricard, located in Le Castellet, France, has been criticized a lot for the boring spectacle the 2018 and 19 F1 Grand Prix showcased. Confusing track, dull races, weird bold choice of very wide runoff areas with, instead of gravel traps, blue and red abrasive lines here to slow out-of-control cars down. As a matter of fact, these two Grand Prix were criticized so much that some people were actually happy this Grand Prix didn't happen in 2020. People would rather skip this race than having an extra race. Very questionable in my opinion. Anyway, this is the actual French Grand Prix. This is what we French F1 fans have to support and cheer for if we want to see our favorite sport in our beautiful country. Vive le vin, le fromage, omelette au fromage.
And I've been to France, it's beautiful.
Il est pas le seul ce soir. Moi, je suis
escargot. I love a croissant. I love an omelette du fromage.
So, what do I ultimately think of this circuit, of this Grand Prix? How can we make it better? I'm Jordan from La Grande Chicane, the first F1 and motorsport related YouTube channel in both French and broken English. Maybe it's the first channel in both languages. Maybe I'm wrong. To be honest, I didn't have like a closer look at it. I just thought it sounded nice, so... But if you guys are doing the same as me, don't hesitate to send me a message. I'd be happy to have a look at your content. I gotta say, I think this video is gonna be more about emotions, how I feel about this Grand Prix and, you know, the history there's behind it, than just on the technical side, because a lot of YouTubers did it already. How to fix the circuit Paul Ricard. Look for that on the YouTube search bar and you'll find plenty of content and absolutely amazing content. But I do think how I perceive the French Grand Prix is directly linked to the history of France in motorsport and in F1 in general. France and F1 had a conflictual story for about 10 years on and off. Again, when I'm saying France, I'm not talking about French Grand Prix specifically, but also French drivers, teams and engines, for instance. And this is a big deal for me. It explains the concerns I have about the circuit Paul Ricard. Because it is very important to explain that being a French F1 fan has been super hard for several years, and how I feel about this circuit is directly related to it. And spoiler alert, I'm still hopeful. Basically, you know, Alain Prost is our Formula One superstar, he's a 4-time world champion, and we had many great racers back in the 70s and 80s. In the 90s, of course, Alesi and Panis were super popular. Prost started his own team and Williams was winning everything with the Renault engine at his back. France was in a good shape until Alesi and Panis retired without winning too much. The Williams and Renault partnership ended. Prost Grand Prix went bankrupt. It's not funny, but that's how it is. And then Renault decided to make a comeback to the sport by having a factory team. So they bought the team that was initially Benetton, that was based in Enston, England. So it was a French team based in England with an Italian team principal and Spanish, Italian, Brazilian, Finnish drivers, and maybe like one French reserve driver. They obviously won the championship in 05 and 06, so we got to hear the French anthem a lot. But I never felt like this team was truly French somehow. For example, at the same time, Sébastien Loeb was winning everything in the World Rally Championship with Citroën. He won like 9 titles in a row. And Sébastien Loeb was way more famous than the Renault team in France, I feel like. But it's also because at that time, F1 was seen as just the sport of middle-aged men who's got nothing else to do than watching Formula One on a Sunday afternoon, rather than, going out with their children and, have some fun hiking or stuff like that. And there were a lot of different stories about Renault at this time, such as the story with the mass damper, the Michelin tires that were supposedly better than the Bridgestone. That's why for some people, what happened at the Singapore '08 Grand Prix wasn't too surprising, I feel like. If there was a team that, would have done this, it would have been Renault, in my view, back then. So if you guys don't know what happened, basically Renault asked Nelson Piquet Jr. to crash on purpose so Alonso would get the win more easily. And '08 was the year the French Grand Prix was discontinued as well, the Grand Prix in Manicourt. The only hopes we had at that time was Romain Grosjean, who was doing well in GP2, and fortunately it didn't go well with Renault. There was still Red Bull winning with the Renault engine from '09 onwards, and somehow I was happier than when Renault was actually winning, because it was putting some highlight on the work of Viry-Châtillon. Viry-Châtillon, the place in France where the engine department is based. Like, I remember when we were talking about Red Bull, they were like, oh yeah, it's this team based in England, but, with an Austrian owner, and they were always talking about Viry-Châtillon, so they would get the benefit back. And when Renault was winning, we didn't talk too much about Viry-Châtillon, so that's why that made me bit sad. So for 10 years we didn't have a French Grand Prix. What I remember the most about the French GP in Manicourt was when I played it on the Formula 1 video game on PS1. So that means I don't remember a lot, and just remember Schumacher was always winning there, but he was always winning anyway. Not to point the finger at this track, because to be honest, I don't know it very well, but what I do remember about the times we were watching the French Grand Prix was my dad. My dad is a man from southern France, and he was telling me about how great when Formula One was racing in the legendary circuit Paul Ricard. At this point in my life, Ricard was only the alcohol my uncle was drinking during the aperitif. The aperitif. As I didn't know much about this track and the history of Formula One back then, I remember my dad told me about how French drivers and French teams used to be successful in the 80s. And there was even this race, I think it was in '82, when René Arnoux won ahead of Prost and Pironi and Tambay, which is like the four Frenchmen at the four first places. It could have happened in, I think, 2013, when we had Grosjean, Vergne, Pic, and Bianchi, but unfortunately Grosjean was the only one with a good car at this time, so maybe we actually managed the four first places, but from the back. I gotta have a look at it. But there wasn't any French Grand Prix in 2013 anyway. We had to wait until 2018. For some times in France, we felt like it was like kind of a political decisions to not have a Grand Prix, because maybe the successive presidents Sarkozy and Hollande didn't feel like it would have been beneficial to the country. They're just a bunch of cars running in circles, and they pollute. It's expensive to organize it. It's not great image-wise, kind of. Not too eco-friendly, hey? Can we talk about the amount of pollution football/soccer brings to our planet in terms of logistics? All that was before Macron was elected, not saying that he was our savior, because it's not directly related to his election. But at that time too, Liberty Media took over the organization of Formula One. And Liberty Media made Formula One way more appealing to a younger audience. And maybe they felt like it was time to bring back the French Grand Prix, because in the end, it's a very important country for Formula One. Like I told you, French F1 drivers, the teams, the engines. And 2018 was also the first year Netflix filmed the show Drive to Survive. That was a huge hit in France, bringing so many new fans to the sport in the whole world, but also new fans in France as well. It was bingo for France, despite the shitty race. Netflix knows how to create tension when nothing's happening, right? Like this rivalry between Carlos Sainz and Lando Norris. Come on, these two are not friends at all. They hate each other. But in French motorsports, the ups we had were always tied with huge downs, like huge downs. You know what I'm going to be talking about. The loss of Jules Bianchi after what happened at the Japanese Grand Prix 2014 was a huge deal for us. It put like a perspective on the sport and why even bother racing? Why even, having cars running in circle? Is this sport worth a human life? It was such a hard time. It was way harder than when, the French Grand Prix was discontinued, the Singapore '08 events. We talk about the loss of a human life, and Jules Bianchi was seen as the next big star in French motorsport. He was going to be the next world champion. He was from a very famous family from France and Belgium. He was basically seen as kind of the chosen one. And how I felt about the loss, it was particularly painful for me because he was from southern France and I am from southern France. I could relate to his career. Like, we've grown up in the same kind of area and we dreamt about the same things when we were younger. So I would relate more to Jules Bianchi than I ever related to Grosjean and Verne, for example. Even if I, of course, cheered for them, it was different. I always felt closer to Jules Bianchi. A French GP was welcome to cheer us up at this time. Renault was back with a more French-oriented team. Vasseur, then Abitboul. Gasly was just around the corner. Ocon was doing well at Force India. Somehow, all the French drivers and teams managed to have a shit race at the 2018 Grand Prix. Ocon crashing with Gasly, and in 18, what happened there? I think it was just Gasly was suffering with the Red Bull. Ocon wasn't there. The Haas was a dog. And Leclerc, we love him, but he's not French. That's the only thing that's kind of sad about it. Because Leclerc was actually doing well in 19. And 19, we had to suffer another loss. It was the passing of Antoine Hubert at the Belgian F2 Grand Prix. So the French F1 Grand Prix delivering bad races alongside all those bad events for French teams and drivers. It was hard to be a French F1 fan, ready to give up on this Grand Prix, on this idea of being a great nation of this sport. Red Bull didn't even have a Renault engine anymore. The Renault in 2018 wasn't super great either. But this year, something happened. Pierre Gasly managed to score a podium at the 2019 Brazilian Grand Prix after doing a great race. Of course, there were some circumstances that helped him to reach the podium. Wow, so many emotions. It truly felt like a redemption. And that was before the Monza 2020 Grand Prix. That was the ultimate redemption. It truly felt like a sort of a beginning of a new era for French motorsport. And this includes making Circuit Paul Ricard great again. Sorry about that line. I live in the south, but I've never been to the Circuit Paul Ricard. Mainly because Grand Prix are too freaking expensive, let's be honest. This is ridiculous, and sometimes they're not even full. So the only way for me to see Formula One cars live is to go to the Circuit of Catalonia in Spain, which is roughly 3 hours away from where I live. And it's kind of a decent price, still kind of expensive, but still very much decent. And also there is the Monaco Grand Prix, which is super close to where I live too. It's funny because in the calendar this year, they've decided to go from Catalonia to Monaco, then fly to Azerbaijan, and then go back to the south of France at Paul Ricard. Can you guys explain this to me? Like, the tracks are just, next to each other. Why bother running hybrid engines and saving fuels and tires when the logistics of the whole event are so damn not logical. So am I excited to see this year's French Grand Prix? I gotta say, yes, I am hopeful. What happened this past year with performances of Pierre Gasly and also the performances of Ocon, a lot of people seem to forget about it, but Ocon scored a podium at last year's Sakir Grand Prix. Ricciardo scored many podiums with Renault, and you know, I think it's gonna take just a couple of Grand Prix before Alpine reach the level they had last year, and it seems like 2021 Formula One season looks a lot like last year's season when at some races Aston Martin will be faster than McLaren and McLaren will be faster than Ferrari, and maybe if for example some teams we can truly see that Aston Martin is not as good as Racing Point was last year and Ferrari has made like a huge step forward. I think it's still gonna be like track depending and weather depending. I hope that the Circuit Paul Ricard organizers, including Eric Boulier, are gonna do everything to make this Grand Prix more appealing, exciting by changing details of the track, by offering ways to the drivers to nail this track without being confused, by helping these lines to be more abrasive and actually slow the cars down. For some reasons, those blue and red lines always made me think more about martini than actual Ricard alcohol, Ricard pastis. That's why I've decided to wear this Williams Martini shirt, you know, when they used to be good. There was a time Williams used to be good. Trust me. It's also up to the TV direction to make this Grand Prix more entertaining, help the viewers understanding the track better. Hopefully this year Gasly and Ocon will be in a good shape and be able to fight at this Grand Prix without crashing into each other. Please don't crash into each other, guys. Bring us emotions. France, help us getting there. I hope you guys changed your mind about the Grand Prix and you guys are hopeful like I am. Probably not. That's why I hope this Grand Prix will actually deliver. So it would stop, you know, being a meme or, you know, being criticized like it has been criticized until now. I mean, who knows, you know, just this year we managed to get second at the Eurovision when we usually like in the bottom 5, so miracles can happen. That's why I feel like we'll have a great Formula One Grand Prix in Paul Ricard this year, because France managed to get second at Eurovision. That is the reason why. Assez de chicane pour aujourd'hui. Bye bye.